the most ironic thing is that people who claim to be religious are killing, and in fact in larger numbers than otherwise, which goes to show how religion devoid of inquiry can be actually very dangerous, because it only fortifies the ego and makes one feel more tribalistic, more caught in identities. What are we seeking, or what are we looking for in this whole process of self inquiry? Um, I think one way to look at it is simply to be free of all unnecessary suffering. Pain is unavoidable in life. We have physical pain, we have diseases, we have illness, and so on. The body goes through what it goes through. And there is death. Animals go through that too. All living beings, anything that comes into being goes out. But there is so much unnecessary suffering that thought creates, and it's all based on the ego, and it happens at all levels, in all relationships, between spouses, between families, between societies, between nations, between religions. And when we look at how much of this is simply based on ignorance, it's very sad to see that, and how much of it is because we have a deep misunderstanding of our own nature and the nature of God, which are non different. We normally say that God is good, God is all merciful. And when we look at the world's events, it doesn't seem that way. And there is a contradiction there. And that's because of our own understanding of what is God is perhaps where the fault lies, because the true nature of what we call God is not the movement of thought that creates suffering. It is the space in which thoughts come and go. So the space is always good because it's never polluted. It can, you know, we can have a beautiful fragrance floating through space, or we can have a stink floating through space. Regardless of the smell of the air, the space remains the same, and it's always good because it's never polluted. So that's what is the space of awareness. Regardless of what thoughts go through, whether it's good or bad, and it's all again a judgment based on our conditioning, the awareness in which thoughts happen do not change, does not change. It remains the same, it remains pure. Awareness by definition is pure. Consciousness, again, these are words. Sometimes we can use these words in different ways, but when we refer to consciousness or awareness, we refer to that which is unchanged, which is pure ever, and that is God, and that is always good. And that which comes and goes in this space, of course, takes relative colors of different modes of nature. So the Gita says, for example, and it's very logical, we don't have to go to even Gita, but Gita nicely lays out that there are three types of modes of nature. There is ignorance, there is passion, and there is goodness, tamas, rajas, and sattva. And we see that in every activity. Even in our own day, we sometimes are dull, sometimes we are very active, and sometimes we are calm. And that's true with all aspects of nature. But these coming and going of different modes of nature, which causes thoughts and words and actions, are all happening in the space of awareness that's unchanged. So, the whole purpose of the human life is to realize our true nature, because we are uniquely endowed with the ability to look at our own thoughts, look at our own moods, look at our own ways of living, and see the suffering it causes and be able to transcend it. So, in a way, um, that's why all religions, of course, all traditions say that human life is unique, but it also ironically has the most suffering, because animals don't fight religious wars, animals don't kill except for the reasons of survival, whereas humans kill other humans, which has no evolutionary reason, so to speak, or no logical reason, just for an idea. But the same humans are also capable of transcending uh, entirely the identification with body and mind and realize our divine nature. So we have a unique ability to go to the darkest hell or the most beautiful heaven, which is our own true nature. Other beings cannot go to either extreme. So we have this unique, both blessing and curse. And whether we go with the curse or with the blessing is really what life is all about. And of course, grace is what takes us to the blessing. It is not our own volition. We are brought together by grace into this inquiry, by the grace of the Guru, by the grace of God, which is one and the same. And when we say yes to grace, and when we say no to the ego as it rises, the more we say yes to grace, the more our life becomes tuned with grace, and we ascend to the heaven of our own nature. And the more we say yes to ego, we descend to the darkness of hell, which is simply the suffering caused by ego. So there is a nice statement I heard in this regard from the Bible. Actually, it says, "Taste and see that the God is good." As taste and see that God is good. It's a very nice statement, because it says taste. It doesn't say believe, even. It doesn't say faith. It says taste. So just as you can taste something and see if it's good or not, here it says taste and see that God is good. And how can we taste God? We can taste God only by going into our own nature and realizing the pure awareness that's within us. And so, therefore, we don't need faith here. There may be some faith necessary, and in some cases, but that's not the most important thing. Actually, the most important thing is to see for ourselves, especially in this age of when there is so much explosion of science and technology. Simple faith doesn't hold ground. The scientific process always looks for proof and validation, and that's a very valid thing to ask for. And here, there is no need for faith, actually, if we really go inward and taste our own nature. And it's always available. We just have to recognize it. So that's why Ramana Maharishi says, uh, to know God is to be God. You cannot know God as an object of knowing, but only as your own being. So that is exactly, I thought, a beautiful mirror of that statement, taste and see that God is good. Because by being in our own true nature, we taste the essence of God. And that gives us the conviction more than anything we read, anything we listen to. As someone said, you don't have to believe that the sun rises, because it simply does, and you see that. So if it's as self-evident as the sun rising that our nature is divine, then we don't need faith. And that's the endeavor of self-inquiry and surrender. And that's the unique teaching of Ramana Maharishi. It's not new, because as we see, there are indications like this in even the Bible, which was very interesting for me to listen to. There are, of course, beautiful pointers in the Gita and in so many traditions, but Ramana came and beautifully made it accessible to the rational mind of the 20th century when he came last in the previous century, and makes it very clear as to what the process of self-inquiry is. And many of what was shrouded in mysticism is now so clear. And he in fact has a beautiful verse he writes in Arunachala Aksharamana Malai, where he says, in Tamil it says, வெளிவிட்டேன் உன் செயல் வெறுத்திடாதென்னை அணைத்திடு Arunachala. It means Arunachala, he's talking to Shiva. He says, I let out your secret, don't blame me for it. It's a very cute line. He says, because it was a secret. It's not that it was not there. But verses like this, taste and see that God is good, it's mystical. It's not very directly accessible to most people. The verses in Gita were not accessible to most people. The verses in Upanishads were even less accessible to most people. So Ramana came and let it all out very clearly in open daylight. And he himself, in a cute way, acknowledges it. It says, I let out your secret. Now don't blame me, because it's your grace that made me do that. And so that's the unique grace of Ramana, that Maharishi, that we are able to talk about it, and we have so much clarity thanks to the grace of Maharishi. But ultimately, as he always points out, the true Ramana is our own nature. And so we have to realize that within. And again, all these pointers are there. As we all know, famously, Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is within you. So there is, all true masters have said the same thing. We, of course, as we said, have this very beautifully made clear for the modern mind by Ramana Maharishi. That's the unique grace of Sri Ramana Bhagavan. So I know there's a lot of questions that people are troubled with. It's very understandable. When there is suffering, when there is pain, when there is these kinds of world events too, like wars and all the rest that humanity is going through. But change begins from within. So if we, as again Ramana said once beautifully, your own self-realization is the greatest service you can do to the world. It's a very ironic statement, because mostly people think you have to do something in the world. You have to take some social activities, whatever. And it's not that any of that is wrong. One can act in so many ways to help suffering of people. But ultimately, you cannot alleviate suffering unless you are free of suffering. And that's why Ramana points out that self-realization is the greatest service to the world, because simply by realizing our own true nature, we can truly relate to others with compassion. The more we are rooted in our nature, the more we can be compassionate. I was reading Neem Karoli Baba recently, and Western devotees had come to him in large numbers in the 70s. Even famously, Steve Jobs went looking for him. He was very famous in the time period. And so many of them naturally asked about Jesus. And he said something very beautiful. He said, Jesus alone died. No, but none of you died. Jesus died because um, the real death he's talking about is the death of the ego. And we see a lot of death, and we are afraid of our own death, which is all very natural and understandable. But the real death is actually the death of the ego, and that is what is signified by the crucifixion. And even Ramana Maharishi has talked about it. And the other thing he said was, which was very beautiful, was um, Jesus never thought about himself. He only thought about others. That's a very beautiful thing to see, because when we come to seeking, and it's understandable, we are thinking about our life and how we can be free of suffering. And that's understandable because that's where we come from. But true realization is when we see that suffering is not unique to us. Everyone is going through the same experience. And this has been said by different masters in different ways. Um, Krishnamurti used to always say, "You are the world." And he would say that the moment you realize that you are the world is when your actions are out of compassion. Because as long as you want to do something that's for your own benefit, there is still a separation. But when we realize that suffering is of the mind is the same mind that operates in all humans, the terrorist has got the same mind as us. It is not such a far stretch for the egoic mind to commit terrorism, to commit all kinds of heinous crimes. Um, as long as one is caught in ego, it's only a matter of chance in terms of what kind of crime that can come out of that mind, and that suffering that someone commits when they, not only the victim, of course the victims are most unfortunate, but even the perpetrator of the crimes are going through a lot of suffering because they are caught in ignorance. And when we see that that suffering is because of the egoic mind, which is the same egoic mind operating in all the 8 billion brains, including us, then we see that this is not about some personal salvation, but this is about the nature of the human mind itself. And that's the Buddhist principle too. They call it bodhisattva, where in Buddhism it's said that I don't want realization until every single human is liberated. That's a way of putting the same thing, that our goal is not personal salvation, but compassion for all suffering beings. So as long as we can see this, that it's both are not individual. Suffering is also ultimately not individual, and our reality is also not individual. Our true nature has no individuality in it, it's one. But even suffering has actually no individuality in it, because thoughts are not individual. They are just floating around like clouds. And envy may come to me one moment, the same envy goes like a cloud to you another moment. So it's the cloud of thought that creates suffering. And so if we can be free of that through self-inquiry and realize our own nature, and share that with people who are interested in it, then we can, in our own way, um, create a better place.